Right, welcome back to Inclusive Design 24 2019, brought to you in partnership with our gold supporters, Barclays Access and Intopia. And we're back after a slight technical delay. Don't forget you can subscribe to Inclusive Design 24 on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/Inclusive Design 24 and hit that subscribe button. You can follow ID24Conf on Twitter, and if you have any questions for Stuart, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag, and we'll ask them at the end of the session. And as a reminder, ID24 is a respectful community with a code of conduct available at inclusivedesign24.org/2019/code of conduct. And also a quick hello und guten Tag to ID24 in Berlin, set up by the Verlag der Tagesspiegel.
Next up, we have Stuart Langridge, who will be talking about the UX of text. Over to you, Stuart.
17,000 years ago, the world's first modern French person stood in a cave and tried to find a way to tell us, 300 generations into the future, what was on their mind. The survival of the tribe, the majesty of the animals that shared their world, the glory of the hunt and the stars in the sky. And they drew it as best they could. These are the cave paintings at Lascaux in southern France. The Great Bull is 17 feet long. It's the largest cave art animal anywhere in the world. This is the crossed bison. This tells us something about the artist. They understood perspective, the idea of representing three dimensions, a three-dimensional world in a two-dimensional painting. You can see that one bison is standing in front of another, occluding the other from sight. 4,000 years ago, an unknown author first wrote down a story about the king of Uruk, a city in what's now Iraq, and he opened it like this. I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh. This was the man to whom all things were known. This was the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise. He saw mysteries and knew secret things. He brought us a tale of the days before the flood. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor. Returning, he rested. He engraved on a stone the whole story. That you're looking at is the stone. It's the first tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first surviving work of literature. Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. He fought and defeated the monster Humumba. He sought eternal life. The French chap, he liked animals. We don't know a lot else about him. What's the difference? Words. Words are good. We talk to computers by pointing and tapping and clicking like a caveman. We talk to one another with words, with pure, unvarnished text. Now, there will be some people listening to me saying this, thinking, oh no, what he means by using text is this, the command line, right? This is not what I mean. Everyone's familiar with the whole computer says no thing. The issue is that historically, to talk to computers, we require that people speak computerese, and that doesn't work. We require people to attempt to understand how the computer thinks and then interact with it in a way that the computer finds acceptable. Those of you who've been asked to do Google searches by friends because you're better at Google searches than they are will have, I suspect, some sense of this, that people who tend to be good at finding search results tend to be the people who understand kind of the way Google search works. No one without 25 PhDs understands entirely how Google search works, but you get a sense of how it interprets pages, the kind of things it finds important. You're essentially doing a very small amount of SEO in your head in order to craft the kind of search which gives the results you want. And that's a skill. It really is. We've largely avoided the problem of teaching people to speak computerese. We said teaching people to speak computerese is bad. We don't want to do that. So we've avoided the problem by not having people converse at all. Instead, you press a little picture. We give people a selection of icons and they pick the one that they want, point and click. And that's all there is. No actual conversation at all. But maybe there's a better way to do this. Importantly, we don't want to try and make computers be human either. The way to have a conversation with software is not to have the software pretend to be a human being, because computers are supernaturally bad at pretending to be human. The Turing test is really hard, and no one's particularly close to passing it. There is a thing in graphics called the uncanny valley, where if you make something which doesn't look actually photorealistically like a person at all, a cartoon, for example, everyone has no trouble recognizing this as a picture of a person. But if you try and make something that actually looks like a real person, looks like a photograph, the tiniest imperfection throws the whole thing out. So if you start with a graphical attempt to look like a person, or if you're building a robot or an android or something like that, if you don't make it look particularly like a person at all, people will recognize it and respond to it for what it is. If you try and make it look and act like a person, we as people are exceptionally good at picking up the tiniest false note in that performance. And it's really unsettling and people don't like it. But importantly, we don't need to make conversations with software possible by pretending to be a human. What's required is that someone who's interacting with your app, your service, your hardware thing, whatever, your software, someone who's interacting with that with language knows that it is a computer, but doesn't feel that they have to talk to it like a computer. So a little story. I got an Amazon Echo, an Echo Dot, actually, this thing you see here. And when I first got it, I did all the usual things with it. Alexa set a countdown timer for 20 minutes. And Alexa, what's in the news? And Alexa, play Roads by Portishead. I'm being slightly quiet here in case my actual Echo Dot hears me saying this and starts doing all of it. But hopefully it won't. One day, I got a phone call while it was playing music, and without thinking, I just snapped at it, Alexa, shut up. And it did. It immediately heard that, stopped playing the music. This, people, is how you make your electronics come alive. I actually felt guilty for being mean to it. What we need to do is help people have a conversation with your app to lead them down a path that lets them get what they want. And importantly, these are all the same things that you're doing anyway. You're plotting a user journey, you're doing interaction design, you're understanding the user experience. And the user experience of something you talk to by voice or with text is still a perfectly legitimate user experience. There are people out there who think that user experience is user interface, is graphics. Right? And so the impression that you'll get from that sort of thing is that the skills in user interface are whether your buttons have rounded corners or not, which fonts you choose, and so on and so forth. But actual UX designers know that that's not the point of it at all. Designing the user experience applies to everything, and that applies to textual-based interfaces just as much as it does everything else. So if you're storyboarding a conversation, a graphical representation of how someone will use the app or the system that you're building, and looking at it as something from the perspective of the person using it rather than your perspective as the designer, how people experience your application. That's why it's called the user experience. So a storyboard is a visual version of the user journey. Again, people who are professional UX designers, first of all, might disagree with that definition, and secondly, already know this stuff, and that's fine. But speaking with voice assistants, typing to systems generally, is about language. It's about how to ask questions in a way that helps people to get where they're aiming for. When we're building an application that runs on text, that runs on words, how do we guide that conversation so that it ends up in a place the user wants, so it gives them the answers that they need or the information that they're asking for? It's not about drawing an app to look pretty, it's all words. But that means that we don't need artists, we need poets. We need people who can understand how to shape a conversation so that the person that you're speaking with ends up in the place they wanted to be. But we're not making the person saying it ask the questions in a way that we, the computer, understand. So this language, this conversation, where's it taking place? I've already mentioned one place, voice assistants, Alexa, but there are actually two. So there are home assistants, so Alexa, Google Assistant, Google Home, the Siri HomePod, and so on. But there are also messaging applications, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Slack, Telegram, SMSs, whichever things you want. I suspect everyone listening to this has an account on about 25 different chat applications. I know I do. But importantly, everyone's got an account there. These are two completely different platforms, in theory, voice assistants and textual chatbots, but everyone's already using them. So if everyone's already using them, why shouldn't they be using them to work with you, to interact with your service, your application, whatever it is you're building? I mean, that's a huge user base. And one of the nice examples here is that you don't have to worry as much about installation. No one has to go off to the App Store and install your app, or no one even has to remember your URL. Interacting with your service is just, okay, Google, ask your thing about something. Or it's sending a message right from the messaging app they're already in for most of the day. But the beauty here from a developer point of view is that these are actually very, very similar services. If you build a textual way of interacting with your service, you can then plug it into everywhere. Once that textual way, that way of having a conversation, of leading people towards the answers that they need, once that exists and you've worked that out, you can put it on the Amazon Echo, and you can then put it on Google Home and the Apple HomePod just as easily. And then you can also put it on Facebook Messenger and put it on WhatsApp just as easily. And it's all, from your point of view, the same interface. You receive text and you respond with text. Now, you may alter things slightly depending on the platform it's presented on, but that's similar to a whole bunch of other stuff. The main key point of it, the thing that you're doing, is receiving a sentence, responding with a sentence. And if you do this, you'll work to help people interact. It works everywhere because it's not about the technology, it's about the user experience. And then you've got the reach to get everywhere. Everyone's on at least one chat app, maybe 20. Voice assistants will be in 40% of homes this year. And this gives you the chance to reach not only people in multiple ways, but also people who you aren't reaching through the other methods, either because they find it difficult to interact with an app on their phone, for example, or they're just not interested, or they're in, or they don't have a smartphone, or it's difficult to find very persistent internet. One of the nice things about chat applications in particular is they don't use a lot of bandwidth. So if you are somewhere which has a low data capacity, if you're on a metered connection or something like that, or the internet where you are is slow, then sending text backwards and forwards, often quite a good idea. And an example, this isn't just theoretical stuff that I'm talking here. There was a chap in London who set up a chatbot lawyer, and the idea was it would talk people through the process of appealing a parking ticket. So if you got a parking ticket and you felt that it was unfair, if I could see all of you listening to this, I'd ask all of you who've received a parking ticket and thought it was unfair to raise a hand, and I suspect there would be hands raised all over the world. If you received a parking ticket and you felt that it was unfair, there is an appeal process, and the appeal process is notoriously complicated. And so one way of fixing this is to make the appeals process simpler and to, for example, if you look at the work that GDS have done in London on simplifying government websites, making them more accessible, more easy to use, more understandable, that's all brilliant work. And that's one approach to actually simplify the process. Another approach is to provide help to get someone through it. And that's what this chap lawyer did. You went to it and you said, I'd like to appeal a parking ticket. And it said, okay, this is what you need to do first. When you've done that, then come back here and tell me what you did, and I'll tell you what to do next. And with that bot's help, 160,000 parking tickets were overturned. 160,000. That's what you get if you apply an understandable user experience to something complicated like the legal system. And this is how bots work. You send text to them, they respond with text. And text is easy to do technologically, as I've said. It's something that, in theory, almost anyone can write a sentence understandably, and you can engage in a conversation. Everyone does this all the time. It's not like being an artist, which is a skill that a lot of people, me included, just flat out don't have. But everyone can hold a conversation, or at least most people can. And constructing that conversation is a skill. And that's the point. This is why we need authors. We need creative writers to make that user experience better. If you think about your favorite authors, one of the skills I tend to find that authors have is the ability to evoke a sense of something, a place or a person or a feeling with just a few well-chosen words. And if you ask me to describe that sense or that feeling or that place or that person, I'd probably write a paragraph. But if you do it right, you just pick a couple of words and everyone has the picture in their heads. That's not an easy skill, don't get me wrong. And there is a reason that professional authors are professionals and get paid for it. But it is a skill that can be learned, and it's been somewhat slighted in the technology industry. I think there are certainly people out there doing this and doing a really great job of it, writing microcopy. But I think the impression I have from talking to some of these people is that the hardest thing they find is convincing people that their job is actually a job, that you should get someone to come in and write your microcopy for you, the occasional sentence here and there dotted around your site, the text on the buttons, the calls to action. You should get a professional to write those things, because it's actually hard. Everyone thinks they can do it, and it's actually quite difficult. So that's why we need authors. We need creative writers in our industry. We need poets, people who understand language and the feelings that it evokes in people to make the user experience better. How do we help people understand that what they've said to your app or your service or whatever wasn't understood. How do you project the idea that you're talking to a bot, but that it understands you? We don't want to pretend it's a person, but we do want to suggest you talk to it like a person. So, for example, historically with text-based interfaces, whatever they've been, if you said something it didn't understand, it would basically spit back a generic error message at you. Now, that generic error message used to look like syntax error, and now it looks something like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you say that again? But if you have a conversation with an actual person and they didn't understand what you said, they wouldn't respond like that. If they didn't hear what you said, they would say, oh, sorry, say that again. But an actual person wouldn't say, I didn't understand that, say it again. They'd go deeper into the conversation, might ask about individual troublesome words, or they might come at the question a different way, or they might say, okay, if that's you're looking for something and I'm not sure what it is, so could you describe it somehow differently? And that's the key thing here. We need people who understand how to guide a conversation in order to write the plan for how that conversation should go. This is the user experience. This is the UX, the storyboard of a conversation. If they've got a goal, the person coming up using your app has a goal of, I want to have my parking ticket overturned, or I want to book a place in a particular hotel on a particular date, or I want to book a place in a particular hotel on some date around this time, but I'm not sure when, or I want to create a website using your service. How do we make sure that they go away with what they wanted without having to make them learn the commands that make it happen, the magic words that make it happen? And this is exactly the same whether you're doing it on a voice assistant like the Google Assistant or Alexa, or on a text platform like Messenger or WhatsApp. Wildly different user interfaces, same user experience. A blinking cursor is not friendly. How do we guide people through this user journey? So here's maybe an example to think about. This is a Victorian butler and a sergeant major in the army and a student. What do they have in common? And one of the things they have in common is respect. If you think about the relationship between upstairs and downstairs in Victorian England, between the people who owned the house and the servants. And there was respect between the owner of the house and the butler or the tweenie or the downstairs maids. There wasn't equality there, but there were conventions about how you spoke to staff and how they spoke to you. It's kind of, there was a noblesse oblige thing going on, where if you weren't polite to your servants, then society looked down on you. Students are the same. Students are respected by their teachers and respect their teachers in turn, but there are conventions for how teachers will speak to students, students will speak back to teachers. Again, they're not operating necessarily from a position of equality. The teacher is there to teach, the student is there to learn, but there's still that sense of respect between them of how to hold that conversation. So think about the sergeant major. People who've been in the army or have spoken to people in the army will know that there's this idea of managing the manager, where a sergeant major makes it clear to their lieutenant that the order they're giving is a bad order, but they can't actually contradict that order. You can't say, no, that's wrong, because they're the boss. You're not the boss. Similarly, most people, I think, will have the experience of managing their manager at work. In some work relationships, you can entirely say, that thing you're telling me to do is a bad idea and we shouldn't do it. And the manager will listen, and that's great. But it's also useful to have the skill of influencing your manager in a particular direction without directly stating it, because they're not obliged to take direction from you. That's why they're manager and you aren't. But most people will be aware of the skill of influencing their manager in a particular direction. And this is a similar kind of skill to the sort of thing we're talking about for voice assistants and chatbots to use. What you want is, when you're building the storyboard of a conversation, of how to guide people in the direction they want, you want to influence them in the direction you want without actually contradicting them. Learn that skill of being the butler is the kind of vibe that we want from a chatbot or from a voice assistant. It should be a very efficient member of staff, I suppose. So nobody wants to be told you can't have that thing that you've asked for by their Amazon Echo. But the Echo should be able to influence you in a direction which makes you ask the right questions. If I want to book a hotel on a particular date in a particular place, yes, I can show up and say, okay, Google, I'd like to book a hotel in London on the 24th of December. Give me some options. And that's like doing the basic Google search for it. And that's the way a lot of things work. They're not helpful. They're just informative. So you'll then get back a list of all possible hotels, and it's your job to look through them and pick the one that you want. But largely, I think the reason we've done that is that we haven't put enough thought, enough work into how to be helpful. The way most helpfulness software works is, okay, we will attempt to inhale all the data we have about you and then make predictions for you. But that's not how it works. If you walk into a travel agent and ask them, I'd like to book a hotel, they won't say, okay, tell us everything about where you've been on holiday forever and the kinds of hotels you've been in forever, in order that we can deduce for you and present you with the one answer you want. They'll ask questions. What kind of place are you looking for? What have you enjoyed in the past? Why did you enjoy that thing and not this other thing? Does this look like something you'd like? So they're guiding you through a conversation to the answers that they need in order to actually fulfill your request. But they're not doing so by giving you a questionnaire and making you fill it out. And they're not doing so by inhaling everything about your life and then determining it for you. It's that skill of responding respectfully, but still influencing the person asking into giving over the information that you need to fulfill it. It's the skill that a sergeant major's got talking to the lieutenant. It's a skill that students have got talking to teachers, that people have got, employees have got talking to their employer, that the butt has to steer the house owner. And that's the skill we need. And as I say, it's a skill that we don't really have very much. What I'd like to see is more people recognizing that this is a skill and then building up knowledge about how to do it. We already have a bunch of that knowledge. As I say, people understand managing the manager. We already have a bunch of knowledge about how to choose good words. That's what being an author is. Pulling these things together as part of the user experience is likely to open up the door to much better user experiences on these platforms, and therefore more people able to interact with your software through these platforms, and therefore more people getting the experience they want. And that's what we're here to build. One of the other nice things about this is that this is still something kind of new. Obviously, there have been chatbots forever. Voice assistants are not a brand new thing. They've been around for years now. But because no one's really doing it right, everyone's just taken essentially the command line and ported it to these things, or they've taken an HTML form and ported it to these things. No one's really building a great user interface that really embraces the language of the textual platform. If you do this just by being involved, you're ahead. No one's going to write a headline which says, "Oh, new startup has a website." But young entrepreneur, an early adopter of language-based technology, maybe, yeah, you could, because you're getting to people where they are. Rita Mae Brown said that language is the roadmap of a culture. It tells you where its people come from and where they are going. where you're going, I suspect, is to the next talk as part of ID24. But before then, I believe I have a little bit of time for questions, if anybody has any.
Oh, thank you very much, Stuart. That was amazing. Hans, have we got any questions?
Yes, so we have a few.
Okay.
The first one is from somebody whose name I'm not going to be able to pronounce properly, but it looks like Mikolai Rodniki. And the question to Stuart is, considering all you have said, is text, such as writing and script, communication dying? Is it the dawn of non-text communication? And does this have any impact on accessibility?
I don't think text is dying at all. I think the key thing here is that the use of text in computer interfaces died for a while, but that's because we didn't know how to do it well, basically. And what I'd like to see is a resurgence of that. It certainly hasn't died in the rest of the world. And from an accessibility point of view, one of the downsides of text dying out in user interfaces, because we didn't know how to do it well, so the idea was we'll start presenting people with point and click stuff. We're not going to have a textual conversation. The disadvantage with those things dying is that text is a lot easier to make accessible. There is a reason people say when you display an image, also provide alternative text, please, because the text is understandable. Text is translatable. Text is readable by audio systems in a way that graphical stuff is not. So almost by definition, a move to textual-based interfaces will improve accessibility in at least some quarters. And that's another good reason to do it, on top of the fact that you're also getting to people in a new way and you're reaching people who you weren't reaching before. You're also reaching a whole bunch of people who would find it difficult to interact with your website or your native app or whatever. So I don't think text is dying. I mean, I'm sitting next to a bookshelf full of books and people still read things. So yes, I do understand the point here that we were moving away from it, but I think, especially with the introduction of things like voice assistants, we are kind of moving back. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. The next tweet is from Kelsey Hall, and it's not so much a question as it is amusing. So if you don't know a response, that's fine. She says, curious about where Google's Euphonia project is at in terms of Desarthric speech recognition. Do you know anything about that?
I don't.
Blurred speech.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't know the detail. What the stuff I'm talking about here about text being your interface. So you receive a textual sentence and you respond with a textual sentence. Possibly before that, there is a thing which turns spoken words into that textual sentence you receive and then turns your textual sentence back into speech again, both of which are alarmingly hard problems to deal with. Fortunately, for someone who's building a service with a text-based interface, a language-based interface, they don't need to worry about that. The people who are dealing with that are Google and Amazon. Right. Amazon are building Amazon Polly or whatever to turn speech into text. Google are building Euphonia, and those are really hard problems that you do not have to solve. If you want to solve them, great, but you don't have to. You can just assume they're being solved by someone else, and then get on with crafting the conversations that are being had. But I will look into Euphonia because I don't know very much about it. Thank you for the tip.
Next question is for myself. I rarely use voice assistants, even though I have a few, because I feel that I'm limited to basic commands rather than having a proper dialogue with the assistant, in which the assistant is specifically addressing my request through individual steps. So I kind of feel like it's like sending a message in a bottle that I don't really get to specify or have a conversation about. Do you think we'll ever be able to have a proper conversation with our computers like they did in Star Trek?
I do, as long as it's on specific topics. Being able to have an arbitrary conversation about anything requires the Star Trek computer and strong AI and so on, right? And I'm not even going to get into a discussion of whether I think that's possible or not. But for a relatively narrowly focused topic, yes, I think that we could already be doing a lot better than we are currently doing. So, as I say, you get little flashes of it here and there. The fact that my Echo responds to Alexa, shut up, came as a surprise to me, because it was a thing that I actually said without thinking. I wasn't thinking I must interact with this by saying, Alexa, pause communication. I reacted to it exactly as I would a person, and it responded exactly as a person would. It is possible to do this.
I would think that's probably the first thing they programmed into that.
Yeah, totally, because it's probably the first thing someone said to it. But so, yes, at the moment, you can't really do this because people aren't working on this very much. It is my firm belief that with not that much work, we could materially improve these text-based interfaces, these language, or we could improve the text-based interfaces into being language-based interfaces. At the moment, a lot of questions and things like that you're asked, they take the cop-out approach of reading you the possible answers and then making you pick A, B, C, or D, because that's super easy to program. And yeah, it is well done, but that's privileging the developer experience over the user experience, which we don't want to do. It ought to be hard to develop things because we ought to be providing a delightful experience for someone, and pick one of the following four options by saying A, B, C, or D is not a delightful user experience.
Right. Next question. Why is it so difficult to pass the Turing test? I mean, you would think it's easy enough to simulate this kind of behavior. But then again, you start up Siri and then you completely understand why they can't do it yet. Is this test standardized, the Turing test, or is it just a random person having a random conversation with a system? Or do they have like a standardized set of questions?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly how standardized it is. There's a thing called the Loebner Prize, I think, where people compete every year to persuade them, to persuade a speaker that you're human. The basic form of the Turing test was you communicate with this thing, and you as a person can't tell whether it's a person or computer on the other end of it. Right. And again,
but that's testing the person as well as the
totally
system.
And there's a whole bunch of literature on this. I mean, people have been working on this for 70 years now. And there's still not anything out there which would consistently fool people for a long time. But this is exactly the point. Passing the Turing test is the wrong goal. We don't want to be, in my opinion, we don't want to be attempting to make a computer seamlessly emulate a human, because it's really difficult and it doesn't buy you anything. What we need to do is find a middle way where people are aware that they are talking to a computer, but they don't feel that they have to respond to it like a computer. In people's heads, when they're speaking to a computer, is, the DOS command line or something, because we've essentially trained people that in order to communicate with computers, you have to do it in a way the computer understands. Otherwise, it just prints up syntax error and kicks you out. And we could do a lot better than that. It will take time. There is a large cultural piece to this. It's not a problem which is just solvable with technology, but equally, part of it's solvable with technology, and no one's working on the technology. So let's work on the technology and work on the cultural stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I feel with Siri. I just feel so constrained in what I can say that I might as well not bother, and I'll just use my hands. But I can imagine for some with disabilities, where that doesn't have that option, it's extremely frustrating.
Exactly. Google Assistant on my phone is the same. I can say, okay, Google, what's this song? If I'm in a bar and there's music playing, I want to know what it is. But if I say, what's playing now? Doesn't get it. My Echo, for some reason, draws this incredibly sharp distinction between timers and reminders. So if I say, remind me in 30 minutes to turn the oven off, and then 5 minutes later, I say, how long's left on my timer? It will say, you don't have any timers, because timers and reminders are different, presumably because they're being stored in different SQL databases or something, right? This is the developer infrastructure poking its head up into the user experience, which is a terrible idea. And it confuses me all the time. It's really frustrating. And simple things like that we could do better.
Like you said, the system needs to adapt to us rather than the other way around. And,
exactly.
But it doesn't have to pretend that it's a human in the process.
Yes, exactly. And whoever cracks this, someone who does this right, will find, I think, people flocking to them. It's like, wow, this is really cool. And then that will essentially kickstart that bit of the industry.
Yeah, that will be the ID24 talk from 2020.
That would be great.
So finally, before we stop, there's a few tweets. Henny Swan said, enjoying Stuart language in his ID24 talk on the UX of text for all the wrong reasons. He sounds a bit like Tom Hardy reading CBeebies bedtime stories.
Wow.
Worth a listen to on all accounts.
Thank you.
And our own host, Patrick, said, I want Stuart language to read audiobooks for me. And the last one from Heather Merriger is, every time Stuart says Alexa or OK Google, my Echo and Google Home keep responding. We just about got an unexpected hotel in London.
I'm sorry about
that. Excellent.
So that was all, Patrick.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of fawning behind the scenes about your dulcet tones there, Stuart, while you were talking. So, yeah, once again, thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you for having me.
And for the audience at home, if you like this session, hit that YouTube like button. And don't forget, you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 for all future notifications. A reminder that Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to our gold supporters, Barclays Access and Intopia, our silver supporters, Adobe and Siteimprove, and our bronze supporters, Samsung Internet, DQ Systems, and the Paciello Group, and is captioned by my clear text. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with Eric Bailey talking about the intersection of performance and accessibility. And we hope to virtually see you there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care.